I take it that we can start?
Yes, definitely. I am giving everything to you, Kaswal.
Okay. One last thing, Danny and Kashwal.
Okay.
Okay. DM Sports and Mafu will come after Judge Aldi, sir.
Okay, that's yes. Absolutely fine.
Thank you very much. Good. All the best.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, I think then we can kick things off. Of course, this is, I take it, one of many webinars that will be held around the celebration and the commemoration of 25 years of the Constitution, hosted by none other than, of course, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. And the Minister, or rather the Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, that's Mr. John Jeffery, will lead a panel discussion under the theme today of the Constitution as an enabler for fostering intercontinental relations towards a better Africa and a better world. Now, obviously, this takes part, as I mentioned, as part of a series of various events commemorating the department's celebration of the 25th anniversary of South Africa's Constitution. And this is obviously part of our Africa Month celebrations. Of course, tomorrow is Africa Day, which is a seminal day. It's extremely important because on the 25th of May, 1963, Africa made history with the foundation of in the formation of the Organization of African Unity, also previously known as the OAU, which was the precursor to the modern day African Union. Now, Africa Day is intended to celebrate and acknowledge the successes of the OAU and now the African Union from its creation back in 1963 in its fight against colonialism and apartheid, as well as the progress that Africa has made while reflecting upon the common challenges that the continent faces in a global environment today. And we know that we have many, many challenges, key amongst them a global pandemic that has burdened us for more than a year. The annual commemoration of Africa Day marks the founding of the OAU in 1963, and this year's Africa Month is celebrated under the theme, the Year of Arts, Culture and Heritage in the Year of Charlotte Maxeke. And of course, to kick off today's events, we're going to be first, the opening remarks are going to be delivered by none other than Mr. John Jeffery, who is the Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. And we thank him obviously for taking us through that particular part. And we also have the formal introductions to all the various speakers. And I will be doing that as we go through each and every single speaker that we have lined up for today. As you heard, what we are going to do is we're going to go through each one of those particular people's individual profiles. And I hope that the minister doesn't mind if I just quickly go through his profile and give a formal introduction of who the Deputy Minister actually is. Now, John Jeffery is a Member of Parliament. He is the Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development. He studied law at the University of Natal and holds a Bachelor of Arts as well as an LLB degree, as well as a postgraduate diploma in environmental law, all from the University of Natal. He is an admitted attorney of the High Court. He is a member of the governing party, the African National Congress. After South Africa's transition to a constitutional democracy in 1994, Mr. Jeffery became a member of the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Legislature, where he chaired the Environment and Conservation Portfolio Committee. Now, Mr. Jeffery has been a member of the National Assembly of Parliament since 1999. He is a former member of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Constitutional Development, where he was instrumental in shaping a number of pieces of legislation, such as, and amongst others, the Criminal Law in brackets, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act of 2007, as well as the Child Justice Act of 2008. He has held the position of Parliamentary Counsellor to the President and Deputy President from 1999 to July 2013, serving under Presidents Mbeki, Motlanthe, as well as former President Jacob Zuma. He was appointed as Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development in July 2013 and was reappointed in 2019 by President Cyril Ramaphosa for a second term of office. Mr. Jeffery is passionate about justice, human rights, and constitutional awareness. And I think without any further ado, it's appropriate that I call upon Mr. Jeffery to take the floor. Good morning to you.
Morning, Gashwal, and thanks very much for that introduction. Good morning to the panelists and everyone joining us on the platform. We're very privileged to be able to have such an esteemed and experienced panel, with each member of the panel bringing their own unique experiences and fields of expertise to the discussion. As you heard already from Mr. Brooks, on the 25th of May 1963, that is 58 days tomorrow, Africa made history with the formation of the Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the African Union. Africa Day is intended to celebrate and acknowledge, you'd also heard this from Mr. Brooks, the successes of the AU from its creation, as well as the progress that Africa has made while reflecting on the common challenges that the continent faces in a global environment. There's a very insightful article on Essay History Online, which sets out the history of Africa Day and explains how after World War II, the process of decolonization of the African continent gathered momentum. A year after its independence, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, convened the first conference of independent African states on the 15th of April, 1958. There were only 8 African countries which were independent at the time, but it became the first Pan-African States Conference to be held on the continent. Subsequently, another conference, the All Africa People's Conference, or AAPC, was held in December 1958, also in Ghana. From the side of South Africa, the African National Congress could not formally attend as an organization, as it was prevented by the apartheid government from doing so. However, a memorandum was sent to the conference. Alfred Hutchinson, a member of the ANC and one of the 1956 treason trialists, left the country without a passport after his acquittal and attended the AAPC on behalf of the ANC. As you'd heard as well from Mr. Brooks, the AU theme for this year's Africa Day celebration is arts, culture, and heritage, levers for building the Africa we want. But in South Africa, we are also echoing this theme by celebrating Africa Month under the theme of the Year of Arts, Culture, and Heritage in the year of Charlotte Maxeke. It's also noteworthy that one of Charlotte Maxeke's favorite topics was the question of African unity, not just in South Africa, but on a continental scale. As you know, we are celebrating another important milestone this year. As we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the 1996 Constitution, it's an ideal time for us to reflect on our past and also our future and the type of society we want to build, not only in our own country, but also in the region and on the whole of Africa. It's important to highlight that our Constitution's Bill of Rights states that the majority of rights are guaranteed to everyone. In other words, not only to South Africans, but also to foreign nationals within our borders. Only 4 sections apply exclusively to citizens. The rights afforded to citizens are only Section 19, political rights, Section 20, citizenship, Section 21, the right to enter and remain and reside anywhere in South Africa, and the right to a passport, and Section 22, the right to choose a trade, occupation, or profession. Therefore, foreign nationals do enjoy the same rights to healthcare, education, and social security as citizens do. Our courts, and in particular our Constitutional Court, have been instrumental in making socio-economic rights a reality for all in our country. In the same vein, our Constitution enjoins respect for international law. When interpreting any legislation, the court must prefer a reasonable interpretation of the legislation, which is consistent with international law, rather than one that is inconsistent. As you know, we've experienced anti-foreigner sentiments in our country, and over the past few years, it's been a priority for government to see how various sectors can work with government to promote orderly and legal migration and good relations between citizens and other nationals. The issues relating to violence and discrimination against foreign nationals were addressed through a number of previous and current interministerial committees, or IMCs as they're called for short, such as the IMC on Migration, the IMC on Social Cohesion, and the IMC on Population Policy. The President established an interministerial committee on migration in July last year with a specific focus on the migration of foreign nationals for employment and related opportunities. The Interministerial Committee on Migration is convened by the Ministers of Employment and Labour and Home Affairs and consists of the Ministers of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, International Relations and Cooperation, Justice and Correctional Services, Mineral Resources and Energy, Police, Small Business, State Security, Tourism, Trade, Industry and Competition, Transport, and Higher Education, Science and Innovation. There are factors which pose challenges. South Africa has become an attractive destination for illegal immigrants seeking economic opportunities. Coupled with growing unemployment levels, South Africa has seen an increase in hostility toward foreign nationals, irrespective of their legal status. This has often culminated in violence, the destruction of property, and the loss of life. Economic instability and the impact of COVID-19 in the SADC and other regions have raised fears that this may ignite future hostility towards foreign nationals. In October last year, the Human Sciences Research Council, together with the IPSOS, looked at anti-immigrant sentiment in South Africa. The survey was conducted between October and November 2019 in the 4 South African provinces where most asylum seekers and cross-border migrants live, namely Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal, the Western Cape, and Gauteng. Some of the findings were that anti-immigrant sentiment is fueled by the implicit and explicit link that is made in the public discourse between migration and social problems or jobs. But there were also positive findings in that it found that the more contact people have with migrants or refugees, the less likely they are to hold xenophobic sentiments. Furthermore, about 2/5 of the recommendations of the 2/5 of the population agreed that according to their faith, they should help provide for the needs of those entering South Africa as foreigners. The study also made a number of recommendations, such as that the media is a highly influential platform which can help change public opinion on migration. A communication campaign therefore requires cooperation from prominent leaders who have the trust of South Africans. Religious institutions could also take a stand, as these organizations can have a significant effect on how people see refugees and asylum seekers. Religious leaders need to be more strongly involved in campaigns and initiatives to reshape the views, attitudes, and beliefs on foreign nationals in South Africa. And it was also recommended that integration policies be implemented to ensure full participation by non-citizens in the social, civic, and economic life of a South African society. Program Director and friends, South Africa has also played and continues to play a leading role in conflict resolution and peace building in Africa. As South Africa relinquished its role as chair of the AU at the virtual 34th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government in February this year, it must be highlighted that during South Africa's tenure as chair, the African Union achieved a number of key priorities as outlined in its program for 2020. These included the historic advent on the 1st of January 2021 of free trade within the African Continental Free Trade Area. Likewise, the 14th Extraordinary Summit on Silencing the Guns reviewed the progress made in the implementation of Agenda 2063, the Agenda 2063 flagship program on silencing the guns by 2020. Under the leadership of President Ramaphosa and the resolute support of the Bureau of Heads of State and Government of the AU and the AU Secretariat, a number of initiatives were undertaken to address the challenges of COVID-19, such as the establishment of the AU COVID-19 Response Fund, secondly, the establishment of the Africa Task Force for Coronavirus, thirdly, the Partnership to Accelerate COVID-19 Testing in Africa, fourthly, the Consortium for COVID-19 Clinical Vaccine Trials, fifthly, the appointment of special envoys to mobilize international support for the continental fight against COVID-19, sixthly, the establishment of the African Medical Supplies Platform, which is a platform developed to assist the AU member states to tackle issues on the supply side of the continent's response to COVID-19 and access to medical supplies and equipment. And lastly, the establishment of the COVID-19 African Vaccination Acquisition Task Team in support of the African vaccine strategy. The task team was mandated to secure the necessary resources for achieving Africa's COVID-19 vaccine strategy, which targets vaccinating a minimum of 60% of Africa's population, and to accelerate the arrangements of financing for the procurement of COVID-19 vaccines for the African continent. It was also the initiative of the chair of the AU to engage international partners and financial institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Union, the G20 member states, and others to support the issue of debt relief for African countries whose economies have been devastated by the pandemic. Last week, President Ramaphosa joined other African leaders in Paris at a summit on the financing of African economies post-COVID-19. In what has been described as a new deal for Africa, leaders and international organizations recognized that we share a collective responsibility to implement relief measures for African countries in distress. Program Director, to conclude, whether it's giving effect to the rights in our constitution or whether it's South Africa's foreign policy, South Africa is deeply committed to a peaceful and prosperous Africa. We're reminded of the words of Patrice Lumumba when he said in 1960 that the day will come when history will speak. Africa will write its own history. It will be a history of glory and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks, Deputy Minister. I just realized, unfortunately, I failed to introduce myself. I'm, of course, Gershwell Brooks. I'm the Communications Coordinator at the South African Human Rights Commission, and I am your Program Director for this event, for this prestigious event today. Up next, of course, is a speaker, a panelist that needs no further introduction, but nonetheless, I will try my best to give it some justice. We're going to be joined by Judge Albie Sachs, former Constitutional Court Justice, who will be discussing the significant events that led to the development and adoption of the Constitution and the role played by leaders and people of the African continent towards South Africa's liberation and ultimate freedom. And just as an introduction, just to give you an idea, of course, as I said, no need for an introduction here, but I will go through the introduction in front of me, or through the description in front of me. On turning 6 during World War II, Albie Sachs received a card from his father expressing the wish, or his wish, that he would grow up to be a soldier in the fight for liberation. His career in human rights activism started at the age of 17 when he was a second-year law student at the University of Cape Town. He took part in the Defiance of Unjust Laws campaign. 3 years later, he attended the Congress of the People in Kliptown, where the Freedom Charter was adopted. He started practice as an advocate at the Cape Bar, age 21. The bulk of his work involved defending people charged under racist statutes and repressive security laws. Many faced the death sentence. He himself was raided by the security police, subjected to banning orders restricting his movement, and eventually placed in solitary confinement without trial for 2 prolonged spells of detention. In 1966, he went into exile after spending 11 years studying and teaching law in England. He worked for a further 11 years in Mozambique as law professor and legal research. In 1988, he was blown up by a bomb placed in his car in Maputo by South African security agents, losing an arm and the sight of an eye. During the 1980s, working closely with Oliver Tambo, leader of the ANC in exile, he helped draft the organization's code of conduct, as well as its statutes. After recovering from the bomb, he devoted himself full-time to preparations for a new democratic constitution in South Africa. In 1990, he returned home, and as a member of the Constitutional Committee and the National Executive of the ANC, took an active part in the negotiations which led to South Africa becoming a constitutional democracy. After the first democratic election in 1994, he was appointed by President Nelson Mandela to serve on the newly established constitutional court. In addition to his work on the court, he has traveled to many countries sharing South African experience in healing divided societies, and recently served on the Kenya Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board for 15 months. He has also been engaged in the sphere of art and architecture and played an active role in the development of the Constitutional Court building and its art collection on the site of the Old Fort Prison here in Johannesburg. As I said, without further ado, I hand over to you, of course, former Constitutional Court Judge, Judge Albie Sachs. Thank you. Unfortunately, okay, thank you.
Yes, you know, Africa Day, it comes every year. And every year my heart just swells with memories of very, very personal and very, very political. The plane in 1976 landing at Maputo Airport. And I'm so excited. I've been teaching at the Dar es Salaam University Law Faculty. And I'm flying down to newly liberated Mozambique. We knew very little about Mozambique, conquered by the Portuguese, a separate form of experience of oppression. And I get off the plane and I see liberated zone of humanity written up there. And I see a soldier, a soldier standing there with a gun. And I feel so thrilled. A gun on our side, a soldier on our side. The guns always pointed at us, at the people, and now there's a gun defending our right to struggle for freedom. And Mozambique was liberating for me. Attending the gatherings, hearing Samora Machel speaking, feeling the optimism of the Mozambican revolution, totally on the side of liberation in South Africa. And I had two arms then. I remember going down to the docks one day. They've got people from all over the world, from Chile, from Portugal, from Zambia, from Canada, all there serving the Mozambican revolution, helping. And then they say, tell me the countries you're coming from. And one by one, the people put up their hands and everybody cheers. And I feel, oh, so awkward. I'm a white South African. What are they going to think? And finally, I say, what the hell? I'm a member of the revolutionary struggle, put up my arm, and I say, Africa to South Africa. And immediately there's a cheer. I'm accepted as a freedom fighter. And we were accepted. The South Africans struggling for freedom in our country, and Mozambique paid a terrible price, a terrible price. Civil war provoked on them. Millions of people, refugees, child soldiers. I lost an arm. There's so many people without legs in Mozambique. And why? Not simply because they were independent. They were crushed, ground, if you like, ground down by commandos from South Africa, by Renamo, armed by South Africa. Why? Because they supported our freedom struggle. Ruth First blown up, assassinated. Our lights would go off far longer than the lights going off, commanders switching off the lights. Everything slowing down in the country. Millions of people fleeing across the borders into Zimbabwe and into Malawi and up to Tanzania. Millions of internal refugees. And this was the price they paid for supporting us. So Samora Machel's plane was brought down. He was killed together with other wonderful people, lured by a beacon. Why? Because he was now leading the struggle to free the people of South Africa. And finally, I myself, one day, I'm off to the beach. It's the day of the Mozambican woman. I'm about to have a swim in the morning. I'm blown up. And they saved my life. The hospital was so starved of materials, they would wash the bandages, the bloody bandages after 7-hour operation, sterilize them, the needles they injected me with. They saved my life. The Mozambican died. I survived, the Mozambican died. So many of the frontline states were pulverized by armed attacks. The economies were destroyed. And I mention this with some emotion now, because sometimes we South Africans are so insensitive, unknowing, almost perhaps disregarding the huge price that Africa paid for our liberation, for our constitution. And we learned so much from Mozambique, positive and negative. I remember when I was wheeled out, having lost my arm, into the airport again, and I saw a soldier with a gun, and I said, no more guns, no more guns, no more guns. We've got to find another way. We want our freedom, but not with millions of bodies everywhere, with everything destroyed. We want our freedom with a country that's a viable South Africa. So we had to find another way. I learned so much about culture that's so important now. When we set up the new Constitutional Court in Constitution Hill, we've got beautiful pictures and artworks and murals everywhere, tapestries, something I learned in Mozambique because they prize their artists. I learned about pluralism. The foundations of our Constitution, it wasn't through abstract ideas, this system is better than others, we've seen it firsthand. It was so powerful, uniting everybody, people's power, that if there's no space for opposition, opposition doesn't disappear. It goes underground, it gets picked up, we have bitter civil war. So I became a full, complete convert. It's in the Freedom Charter, multi-party democracy. We learned that in Mozambique. And I learned how important the law was for the poor, because although we had martyr spirit and policy, if the poor didn't have a right to have lawyers, to have charges, then the wealthy or the better off, the politically connected, could get away with things. The poor people didn't. The law became important for the poor. Let me fast forward then, after I've recovered from hospital, things I learned about afterwards. And everybody will be able to share that period of creating the embryo of our new constitution in the frontline states through the Constitutional Committee set up by Oliver Tambo. And it's 89, and Oliver Tambo is flying in a little Cessna plane, given at his disposal by Kenneth Kaunda, who played such an important role in our liberation struggle. And he's flying to Tanzania to meet Julius Nyerere, who also played a huge role in our struggle. And he's carrying with him what is called the Harare Declaration. This was the blueprint for our new constitutional democracy in South Africa, crafted in Lusaka by Oliver Tambo, the Constitutional Committee. Mbeki played an important role in the terminology. And it was to get Africa on the side of our people. We didn't want the UN to take over. They would be looking after the white minority in South Africa. We would have ended up with a white minority veto on everything. We wanted a united, non-racial, democratic South Africa, multi-party democracy with the Bill of Rights. All of that included those ideas in the Harare Declaration. And it also called for the release of the prisoners, the return of the exiles, free political activities. It was a lever for transforming our country. And Oliver O.R. flew to speak to Nyerere. He said, you must change this, that's too much to the other. What a role Tanzania played, allowing our people to train in Congo, diplomatic support all the way through. He flew then to Gaborone, also Botswana, so hard hit by the raids into the country, the domination by South Africa. He flew to Angola, bitter civil war, the Kito-Kenevali battle being fundamental to the independence of Namibia, which finally opened the way for our liberation. And now the Harare Declaration, Robert Mugabe saying there's a meeting of the OAU committee in Harare, we'll call it the Harare Declaration. And they took it to the OAU that accepted it. The OAU took the Harare Declaration to the non-aligned movement, accepted it, to the Commonwealth, and even Margaret Thatcher had accepted. And then it went to the United Nations, the General Assembly, and it was adopted by acclamation, the whole world, the pathway to a new South Africa, hardly known in South Africa today, all pioneered with the support inside the ANC, with the support, the inputs made by many other liberation movements as well, incorporated in that document. And February the 2nd was simply FW de Klerk being compelled now to concede to the work pressure that had been garnered outside and being made so necessary because of the huge uprisings of people inside South Africa. So for me, I owe my life personally to the Mozambique doctors who saved my life. But we South Africans, we owe our democracy and our freedom to the peoples of Africa who paid a heavy price in blood and treasure and smashing up so many aspects of what would have been ordinary development. And the very least we can do is acknowledge the contribution they made, and with a renewed reconnection with Africa, the Africa of the days of our struggle, becoming now the Africa that is rising again, and we can celebrate Africa Day tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us a realization and an understanding of the very significant and important role played across the African continent in our own liberation, as well as the greater role that we can play in fostering greater social cohesion, particularly amongst people who hail from this particular continent, and the need for that, of course. Up next, we're going to continue with the program, and we call upon the Deputy Minister, the Deputy Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture. Will be discussing the importance of strengthening people-to-people interaction and celebrating the common African heritage in the context of the Resistance and Liberation Heritage Route program of government, as part of learning about our history and our journey to freedom, which I think is a commonality, particularly on this continent. Now we call upon Ms. Notawe Nomqedu Mafu, Member of Parliament. She started her professional career as a nurse in East London, in the Eastern Cape, and then moved to KwaZulu-Natal, where she later became a councillor deployed by the ANC. Now, Ms. Mafu was then deployed to serve as a Member of Parliament in the National Assembly from May 2014 until May 2019, where she was elected as the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Human Settlements during the 5th Parliament. That was from 2014 to 2019. She was also a member of the Ad Hoc Committee on Funding of Political Parties, and from June 2017 until May 2019, Ms. Mafu was the 102nd candidate on the African National Congress's national election list of 2014, and was its 33rd candidate on the national election list of 2019. Ms. Notawe Nomqedu Mafu is currently the Deputy Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture of the Republic of South Africa, appointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa in May 2019. Ms. Mafu, we call upon you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Keshwell, for those warm words of welcome. And I really want to appreciate the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development for the invite for this important webinar. Of course, this being the Africa Month, and of course being the year of arts, culture and heritage, in the year of Mamo Charlotte Manyamatlake. Obviously, this webinar will not be exhaustive of what we want to discuss. But one area that I want to start with is the journey and significant milestones achieved by women in South Africa, empowering them to navigate the socio-economic challenges. And one area I want to start with is that we all know that since 1994, women representation in parliament has improved. Before the first democratic elections in 1994, parliament only had a mere 2.7% female representation under apartheid. Since the election of the 6th parliament, women members of parliament now account for 44.5% in both the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, a marked improvement by any standard. But you will also remember that at some point in South Africa, we had reached 50% of women representation in parliament. So this number, even though it's an improvement, it has gone down. In terms of basic employment equity statistics, especially with regards to women swelling the middle management and top management ranks, there has been a lot of progress in the public sector, with more women having taken up their places and continuing to do so. The biggest hurdle is with the private sector, where the pace of change has been very pedestrian. It is for this reason that the Department of Employment and Labor is looking at a complete overhaul of the employment equity regime so as to foster compliance. In terms of salary parity, the country has not as yet reached the ideal of equal pay for equal work, especially in the private sector. This too remains work in progress, and the struggle continues for women. In terms of the overall progress and the current state of play, the all-encompassing indicator often referred to as the Gender Inequality Index should be useful. This index reflects gender-based inequalities in 3 dimensions: reproductive health, empowerment, and economic activity. South Africa's GII, which is the Gender Inequality Index, value of 0.394, ranks it at 90 out of 159 countries in the 2015 index, as compared to 90 out of 148 countries in the 2012 index. In terms of the dimensions of the GII, in 2015, for instance, 41.2% of parliamentary seats were held by women compared to 41.1% in 2012. 73.7% of adult women had reached at least a secondary level of education compared to 76.2% of their male counterparts. For every 100,000 live births, 138 women died from pregnancy-related causes, and the adolescent birth rate was 45.5 births per 1,000 women of ages 15 to 19. Female participation in the labor market was 46.2% compared to 60% for men. The importance of strengthening people-to-people interaction in the context of the current Resistance and Liberation Heritage Route Program of government as part of learning about our history and our journey to freedom. This is now the second part. The Resistance and Liberation Heritage is an important component in the rewriting of the new history curriculum, along with the conference resolution of the governing party to make history a compulsory subject. The minister is still to make a determination whether to extend this across all phases up to matric. The conference resolution was not prescriptive in that sense, but we anticipate that the exposure to the study of history will progressively touch all the phases in the basic education sector. To unearth, to write, to codify knowledge about our past for posterity is one of the finest markers of our full and complete humanity as a people. It is to say we know who we are, proud of our past and the generations that came before us. It is to say we have an identity. It is to say we are human. It is also to say we have a soul. Seretse Khama, the first president of Botswana, at his speech at the University of Botswana, Lesotho and Swaziland in 1970, 15th of May, and I quote what the Daily News of Botswana said on the 19th of May, 1970. Open quote, "It should now be our intention to try to retrieve what we can of our past. We should write our own history books to prove that we did have a past and that it was a past that was just as worth writing and learning about as any other. We must do this for the simple reason that a nation without a past is a lost nation, and a people without a past is a people without a soul. Close quote. The project of Resistance and Liberation Heritage Route, known as RLHR, which was presented to Cabinet in 2011, was approved by Cabinet in August 2015 as an ongoing project. This project conceptualized following the roads to independence, African Liberation Heritage Program, which was adopted in 2005 at the 33rd General Assembly of UNESCO, recognizing struggle heritage as being of universal value and significance. The program was endorsed at the 16th Ordinary Session of the African Union in 2011. Now, the United Republic of Tanzania's mandate was broadened with the responsibility of establishing a continental instead of a regional African Liberation Heritage Program in Dar es Salaam, with the maximum support from the AU Commission and all member states. The RLHR project is a national memory project which aims to identify, celebrate, recognize, commemorate, and promote events, places, and persons associated with the resistance and liberation struggle. The route will span sites at national, continental, and international level. The department is working with all the provincial governments in the identification of sites. Each province has identified 3 sites currently, which are the first phase of identified sites, which the national department and the provincial governments will be developing. And some are already functional, while other sites are under development. In the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to indulge this webinar in terms of the 27 provincial sites identified by provinces, which complete our national mapping exercise in terms of the resistance and liberation heritage route. But of course, if you need them, we can always forward them to you, to the people that organized the webinar. As indicated already, and as a way to recognize our location in the African continent and the responsibilities that this imposes on us, this has become not only a national project or a regional project. Rather, it is now a continental mapping project as a way to recognize the varied roles different countries played across the continent in ensuring that in the end, South Africa also attained its liberation. This would also assist in cultivating goodwill and in the building of better relations with the rest of the continent, which intermittently do get strained. The Resistance and Liberation Heritage Route Project does speak to this in every specific and direct way, since the resistance and liberation heritage that is being spoken about seeks to engender the sense of common African heritage. That as people of the continent from the different regions, we are in essence from one stock, and notwithstanding regional and geographical variations, the very essence of our culture, our beliefs and traditions is similar in substance. One needs to just use one simple example as an illustration. When you look at the linguistic traditions of the Nguni group languages, a closer examination does tell that there is a relationship between these groups of languages and Kiswahili, which is also widely spoken in many regions across the continent. Another example is also closer home in terms of related linguistic traditions among most countries in the SADC region, e.g., the Ndebele of Matebeleland in Zimbabwe and the Zulus of South Africa, the Tsonga of Mozambique and those in the northeastern parts of Limpopo, Venda people of the far north of Limpopo and the Shona of Zimbabwe, the Batswana of the Northwest, Northern Cape and Free State, and the Batswana of Botswana. The examples of these linguistic regional ties are too numerous to cite, and they all point to the claim that indeed, and notwithstanding some of idiosyncratic variations, we are of one stock. In terms of people-to-people relations, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture has a very successful Africa Citizens Project, which is really about fostering people-to-people relations through the arts and culture. The Africa Citizen Project is essentially a cultural diplomacy project, and at the very heart of this project is the idea that young and promising South African artists need to be given exposure to the continent and get into joint ventures with other artists in the continent. This happens through a protracted program that touches various parts of the continent and is facilitated by ministries of arts and culture in those countries. Owing to restrictions around the COVID-19 right now, the program had lost some traction, but we hope and are planning for a spirited takeoff once we are on the other side of the COVID-19 challenge. Now, the last part, as part of the vehicle to effectively to deliver on its mandate, the bulk of the budget of the department goes to public entities in transfer annually. One of the key demands the department places on these entities is around messaging. That is, that the messaging must be in sync with the founding values of the Constitution. That is, the overall task why there is funding transferred to public entities is that they ensure that ultimately, through their messaging, through the use of sport, arts and culture and heritage, South Africa becomes a non-racial, non-sexist, and egalitarian society, free from all forms of discrimination and prejudice, regardless of race, gender, language, culture, religion, sexual orientation, or nationality. It is for this reason that we wholeheartedly support the National Action Plan against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances. In terms of xenophobia, we work closely with social cohesion advocates that are involved in all the NGOs that look after the rights of immigrants, especially African immigrants who are in the country having fled persecution and civil strife from their own countries. Again, the point is to use the sport, arts and culture and heritage as an effective medium in building a socially integrated and inclusive society. My last part is that the National Strategic Plan that has been passed by the government to fight gender-based violence and femicide, this department is closely behind it because we believe that we are not going to have a just society with the scourge of gender-based violence going on in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, much appreciated. And I think bringing into sharp focus, especially our thoughts around and action that is required around gender in particular. I think these are conversations that we cannot have in isolation without thinking around gender and the marginalization that also happens in that particular space. Up next, of course, we're going to look at the role of what the International Organization for Migration does in encouraging social and economic development through migration and strengthening the culture of human rights nationally and across Africa. And of course, joining us for that is Ms. Lily Sanya from the International Organization for Migration. If you will just give me a second, I'm just going to tell you a little more, of course, about our next speaker, giving us an opportunity to get some more insight there. Ms. Lily Sanya is the Chief of Mission for the International Organization for Migration, in the South Africa office. Ms. Sanya is a humanitarian at heart and has worked for the past 22 years in several countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, as well as the Middle East. She has vast experience working on migration programs, which aim to stimulate social economic development, regional cooperation, as well as the protection of human rights. Ms. Sanya joined the International Organization for Migration in 1995 and has served in Kenya until June 2004, Afghanistan, Syria, Liberia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Mali, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Between July 2004 to August 2005, she served as a regional trainer for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. She also served as an electoral support officer for the IOM out of country voting process for Iraq and Syria, and the United Nations Assistance Mission in Liberia for the Liberian elections. From September 2005 to date, she has served in various senior leadership positions at the International Organization for Migration in Afghanistan, Syria, Liberia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Mali, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, as well as South Africa. She is convinced that migration can yield positive returns if it is well managed, and has worked with IOM for all these years because her conviction is aligned to the core values of the organization, which are to uphold the human dignity and well-being of migrants, encourage social and economic development through migration, assist in meeting the growing operational challenges of migration management, and advance an understanding of migration issues. And I think without any further ado, I will give you an opportunity to take to the floor, Ms. Lily Sanya. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Facilitator Brooke. Honorable Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, Honorable Deputy Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, former constitutional judge, and the rest of the panelists and the participants. It is my pleasure to be here with you and to say a little bit about what the international organization does, and also how we contribute to ensuring that migrants are protected. So first and foremost, we are convinced, or we are committed to the principle that human and orderly migration benefits migrants and society. And so we act with governments and partners to meet the operational challenges of migration and to understand and to advance an understanding of migration issues. We also encourage social and economic development through migration and work towards effective respect for the human rights and well-being of migrants. Our first principle of our migration governance framework is that migration systems need to adhere to international standards and fulfill migrants' rights to ensure that migration is humane and orderly. We also acknowledge that more people are on the move today than at any other time in history. And of course, there are many reasons why people end up ultimately moving. And some of the forces which are driving migration include issues around climate change. Some of the issues are around natural and man-made issues, conflict, and of course, the demographic trends, which are expanding, making many of our young people jobless. We also look at issues around the widening North and South social and economic disparities. And because we realize migration is a priority issue of the international community, we take note that IOM currently has 173 member states globally, with 53 in Africa. We believe that if migration is well governed, it can benefit both receiving and sending countries. Receiving countries get productive workers who fill key gaps in the labor market and help their demographic profiles, while sending countries receive billions of either dollars in remittances from their overseas workers. It also, if it's well managed, can attract investment from members of the diaspora, and we can also leverage the benefits of circular migration when returning migrants bring back their skills, expertise, contacts, and personal wealth. However, we also know that if migration is not well managed, it can lead to harm, it can lead to danger and insecurity. It can encourage migrant smuggling and human trafficking, as well as social unrest, xenophobia, and discrimination. So the respect of the human rights for migrants is really crucial in ensuring that migration has that developmental impact on societies and economies. That has been acknowledged. And when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, migration is explicitly mentioned in all the 17 SDGs. And it has, it's cross-cutting in nature. You'll also find that as a result of that acknowledgement of the developmental impact that migration can make, if it's well managed, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration was adopted at the United Nations General Assembly in 2018, beg your pardon. And this adoption of the Global Compact was championed by IOM, and it's a milestone in the development of good governance of migration and improved international cooperation on migration, because it provides a roadmap for how states can best manage and cooperate more effectively on migration. Now, since we are celebrating Africa Day, I think that it's of paramount importance for me also just to talk about IOM in Africa. As I indicated earlier, in Africa, we have 53 countries that are member states of IOM. We have 4 regional offices on the continent. We have one in Dakar, we have one in Kenya, we have one in Cairo, and we have one in Pretoria in South Africa. We also have a special liaison mission that interacts with the African Union in Addis Ababa, just to follow up on the issues of migration at the African Union. To manage migration, we acknowledge that it's an issue that cannot be dealt with by just one country, because it's a transboundary issue, and it's important for countries to come together to address issues, because when migrants move, they cross, either they move internally or they cross international boundaries. So what we've done as a way of trying to address migration issues is to cooperate with the African Union, to cooperate with regional economic communities as well. So for instance, with the African Union, we have an MOU since 1998. Then with RECs like ECOWAS, IGAD, SADC, SEP, COMESA, ESC, and ECAS. So basically, these are different regional economic communities, which are the building blocks for the African Union, and we work closely with them to address specific migration challenges within the different communities. And what have we really done in that engagement that we have with the different regional economic communities that I mentioned, and also with the African Union? First and foremost, we were instrumental in the development of the migration policy framework for Africa. Of course, the conversation started many years back until when it was adopted in Banjul in 1996. Then, of course, we have also worked very closely with the African Union to develop the African Common Position on Migration and Development. As I've mentioned earlier, migration indeed can contribute to development if it's well managed. And so the conversation within the African continent has been that let's find a common position on how to address issues around migration. And also some of the other partnerships that we have are within the EU-Africa Strategic Partnership, We have been involved in coming up with policies to address certain issues in migration. So for instance, the Ouagadougou Plan of Action to combat human trafficking, especially women and children, and we work closely with the African Union to operationalize the action plan. We also have worked very closely with the African Union when it came to the Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, popularly known as the Kampala Convention. Also, Africa continues to grapple with conflicts, which also fuel then the large-scale movements of people on the continent. And we've also worked closely with the African Union on the Africa Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development Strategy. And also, of course, you're aware of the African Union Protocol on Free Movement of Persons. So those are some of the ways we collaborate with the RECs just to ensure that migration can be addressed in a holistic way. Some of the other practical areas that we work on is trying to bring governments together to have conversations. And like the Honorable Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture mentioned, having conversations also helps people in a large extent to have a common understanding on issues. And so we've really been instrumental on the continent in hosting various dialogues. So for instance, in West Africa, we've hosted the Migration Dialogue for West Africa. In Southern Africa, we host the Migration Dialogue for Southern African states, which we call the MIDSA for the SADC region. And of course, within IGAD and also within the COMESA region, we have been very instrumental in bringing governments together to have discussions on migration challenges within the region, and also to see how we can have a common understanding. So in particular, I will just focus on SADC. So one of the areas that we've really worked closely with, and at the ministerial level, we have hosted various conferences where we've had specific recommendations. One which has been to enhance the interstate and interministerial collaboration on migration, particularly strengthening cooperation to counter smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons. So towards South Africa, we have what we call the Southern Migration Route, where we have quite a number of migrants coming towards South Africa, looking for opportunities in South Africa, because South Africa is an upper middle income country. However, we also have people who take advantage of that and either smuggle people into South Africa or traffic people into South Africa by coercing them or giving them false information that there are work opportunities. And once people get here, then they really find that they are in bondage and they are taken advantage of. So we've had discussions around that, and also worked really closely with SADC in the development of a SADC regional migration policy framework. And so, so those are some of the ways we are cooperating as a way of really trying to ensure that migration is really well managed. However, we acknowledge that we live in a globalized world, and migration is something that we cannot really stop. What we believe that the best thing we can do when it comes to migration management is for us to manage it, and manage it in a way that adds value. So what we have done is, when it comes to encouraging social and economic development through migration, we help to facilitate exchange of skills and human resources to support national development efforts of receiving communities through a wide range of migration for development programs. And some of the large programs that IOM has been involved in is the return of qualified nationals. So basically what we did is working with migrants who are willing to come back to their countries of origin, either temporarily or on a permanent basis, to contribute to development. We have programs where we also leverage and develop partnerships with the diaspora. So basically nationals who've left their countries and live elsewhere, but still continue to maintain linkages with their countries of origin. So what we do in this kind of situations is really to look for opportunities, either where the diaspora can come in and contribute directly towards providing technical expertise in areas which have gaps, or either where the diaspora also can come in as development partners, where they can bring in resources and invest in particular sectors. And now more than ever, we continue to realize that some of the migrants who have already settled in other countries may not want to return on a permanent basis, but may want to come back on a temporal basis. We also work on programs to encourage migrants who want to come back virtually. And now with the recent COVID pandemic, we've come to realize that we can actually work virtually very effectively. We can have training programs virtually. Now we also have programs on telemedicine. And so these are some of the programs that we really work on, such that we can facilitate what we call brain gain or brain circulation to counter the effects of brain drain. So these are basically just some of the direct programs that we have worked on in countries to really foster that cooperation between governments and countries of origin. Now, what are some of the milestones that I could share with you that I think that IOM has done in the last 25 years? Some of the major ones, I would really say that we've continued to provide assistance to migrants who are fleeing conflict, natural disasters, refugees who are being resettled in third countries or being repatriated, stranded migrants, unsuccessful asylum seekers who want to return home, and etc. So for instance, in South Africa, IOM works very closely with the UNHCR, and we have a project partnership agreement. So basically, if we have any unsuccessful asylum seekers who want to return home, we facilitate that movement of the migrants or the asylum seekers to go back home. And in the last 5 years, I could say that we have assisted a total of about over 9,000 migrants who have wanted to go back to their countries of origin. And directly from South Africa, over 5,000 migrants that we've supported to return back to their countries of origin. And if I'm looking at it from a global perspective, we have assisted more than 1.7 million migrants to return voluntarily to their countries of origin since 1979. So this is within the 25 years that we are talking about. And we've provided protection and assistance over 100,000 persons who've been trafficked for forced labor, begging, and sexual exploitation, again, globally, since, again, the mid-90s. So just in a nutshell, these are some of the areas that we've worked in to really try and address, to foster intercontinental relationship, particularly to make a better world. And in South Africa here, we are closely working with the Department of Justice, Department of Social Development, Arts and Culture when it comes to programs on social cohesion, because I think that is an area that we can also really work on to see how we can contribute to making a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think that it's virtually impossible for us to have a discussion on Africa Day without discussing the importance of migration, the impact that it has. How does one manage it? How does one create and foster the needed social cohesion that goes along with it? I think a very important conversation indeed. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements before we continue with the rest of the program. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that there is a chat function. And of course, we will be having a question and answer session a little later on. After we have exhausted our list of panelists and speakers this morning into the afternoon, we will have a question and answer session towards the end of the program, giving you an opportunity to obviously come in. So please use the chat function. Please, I ask you though, keep your questions or your comments short and sharp, straight to the point, so that I can read those and get to them as soon as possible. And then I just want to also draw your attention to the fact that the Deputy Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, that's Ms. Notlawe Mafu, will be leaving us because she has to travel soon. And we thank you for your participation from the depth of our heart, and the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development in particular thanks you for your participation in today's webinar. Up next, we'll be hearing from Mr. Coogan Pillay from Citizens for Integrity, and we'll be looking at the mandate and the critical role of Citizens for Integrity and the role that they play in promoting a culture of human rights within South Africa. Now, let me just take this opportunity to tell you a little more about Mr. Coogan Pillay. He's presently busy with research towards PhD in governance and sustainability. He's an independent project management consultant with expertise in the areas of governance and development, strategy, formulation and implementation, social justice and human rights, policy development and implementation, as well as business and market development. Now, he is the founding member of the NPO, Citizens for Integrity. He's a steering committee member of the CREWG and ANSA, or ARNSA, former project manager of the NACS, DPME, and SIU, former strategic advisor to Kgalema Motlanthe, that's the former president, towards building an inclusive South Africa in collaboration with the European Union, served as political coordinator of the European Union and associate of various civil society organizations, convened various dialogues on the threat of state capture and corruption on our democracy, also included partnership with Thabo Mbeki Foundation on illicit financial flows, led the OR Tambo debate series on implementing the NDP at the Wits School of Governance in partnership with the presidency, Tambo Foundation and UNDP. He is the architect of development and rights dialogue series under the auspices of the Amit Katrada Foundation, George Bezos, as well as Maxi Sulu, former advisory board member of, or rather a former advisory board member to the Public Protector of South Africa, served as former ANC NEC CRA subcommittee member, strategic partnerships and academia and civil society. So without any further ado, I hand over to you, Mr. Pillay. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. There was supposed to be a presentation that I'd like you to share. Lovely. Let me start off by greeting the Program Director, Deputy Minister John Jeffery, Deputy Minister Mafu, former Concord Justice L.B. Sachs, Ms. Sanya, and Ms. Sharon Ikambaram, and the organizing team. It is indeed an honor to be participating in this important forum and discussion. I must mention at the beginning, when one hears one's qualifications, you know, when you study, you forget about it until you hear it in a few decades. And when I heard the program director mentioning BSc, and colleagues sometimes say, aren't you daunted when you sit with a high-powered panel of legal people, former justice, deputy minister of justice? And I sometimes reflect, and I've retorted, and colleagues might remember in the month of May when President Ramaphosa was acknowledging Charlotte Mackeke on her 150th anniversary. He mentioned to the audience that he's just a lawyer and Charlotte Mackeke was a BSc graduate. So, colleagues, I don't feel daunted in this forum. And then I also follow in the footsteps of, as Justice Sachs might know, Oliver Tambo, Albert Einstein, and Archbishop Makoba, who also have BSc backgrounds. Having said that, my presentation will cover three aspects: the current context and background, and then some revelations on the ground in terms of our constitution, the transformation process, and then human rights. And then the third aspect, I will hone in on what our entity, Citizens for Integrity, hopes to do in promoting human rights. Thank you. Next slide. Yes, so my presentation covers the current context in the 25th anniversary of the Constitution. Then we'll deal with some background since 1994, the constitutional revolution, and then some milestones. And then, as I've indicated, the revelations in terms of what's happening on the ground. And then finally, moving in towards what I'm supposed to be doing, talking about Citizens for Integrity and what we intend doing to help promote a culture of human rights. Thank you. So I think it's difficult not to start by focusing on what is happening at the moment. And we are currently in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you recall, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres started off at the beginning of the pandemic by calling it an unprecedented human rights crisis in our lifetime, and impacting the dignity of citizens worldwide. He also spoke about the COVID crisis, revealing the gaps in our governance, our political and our economic systems globally, and we've experienced that in South Africa as well. We've also, during the crisis, experienced a crisis of epic proportions in terms of morals, in terms of ethics, and values-based leadership. And the crisis has helped to lay bare the social ills of extreme poverty and inequality, unemployment, hunger, greed, crime, and corruption. During the time of the COVID, we've also seen an increase in wealth of the super rich by about 27.5%. In terms of actual value, it was estimated at 170 trillion rands. This is just the growth of the super rich when compared to the masses of people that have experienced starvation, job losses, and so on. And I think we need to acknowledge this as a moral crisis. And ultimately, all this has an impact on the policy goals. In South Africa, the NDP, and from the UN perspective, the SDGs. And this has severe implications for global peace, stability, and social cohesion. So it's very relevant to look at the current context in terms of what we're discussing. Thank you. So let's turn the clock back 27 years and look at where we all started with the Constitution and the democracy. So 1994 was the magic Mandela moment, and Justice Sachs, when I say Mandela moment, I also mean Tambo and Sisulu and all the others who were with him in the struggle. So it was the magic Mandela moment, and we call it the constitutional revolution because we had an interim constitution by that time, which for the first time had a Bill of Rights giving protection and rights, basic rights to citizens. In the early days post-94, the government under Mandela focused on fixing up the legacies of colonialism, of apartheid, and started off with various policy options such as the Reconstruction and Development Program, Black Economic Empowerment, Affirmative Action, GEAR, ASKISA, the New Growth, and finally in 2012 on the NDP. And then a critical turning point in our young democracy was in 2007, when we had the Polokwane Governing Party Elective Conference. And in my view, this was the start of the derailment of the democracy with the disbanding of the Scorpions. And later on in 2014, we had the pronouncements on the radical economic transformation as a policy proposal. And then in 2016, the Public Protector Report on state capture, grand corruption, including looting of state-owned entities. This is during the 9 wasted years. And then at the same time, a resurgence of civil society activism. In 2018, with incoming new President Ramaphosa, the period came in when it was a new dawn was ushered, hope, a focus on good governance and building an ethical and capable state, and various commissions of inquiry, including the presently running Zondo State Capture Commission of Inquiry. And then in 2020, we had the onslaught of COVID-19. And if that was not enough, we had COVID-19 corruption, while the commissions of inquiry were running in parallel. And this year, 2021, led to the formation of Citizens for Integrity, an NPO of which I am a founding member. Thank you. So having looked at the background and the current status, let's look at what's happening on the ground. And in terms of, I call them revelations, the Constitution was there to help transform society from the oppressive colonial and apartheid past to a human rights order. So we've had various studies and reports in the past, such as the Kalema Motlanthe High Level Panel, amongst others, the Kada Asmal report on human rights, as well as the 25-year democracy review by the presidency. We've also had various commissions of inquiry, as I mentioned, and presently we have the Zondo Commission. And what we're seeing from the commission is quite frightening. Expose on parallel governance structures, the repurposing of state-owned entities, the capture of key state institutions, and then we've been exposed to testimonies on a daily basis, and we're not sure which version is the truthful version. There's lies, and more lies. And all this undermining the resources for development and basic rights. More recently, we've seen the threat to the judiciary, the constitution and the rule of law, when former President Jacob Zuma, amongst other senior members in the governing party, refusing to obey certain orders. In the case of the former president, it was disrespecting the Zondo Commission, ignoring the Constitutional Court. And this brings in new threats to our young democracy. Colleagues might remember that the bulwark during the state capture years was the judiciary. And this present threat to the judiciary and to the rule of law and the Constitution has led to a renewal of civil society activism, where citizens are now demanding delivery on their basic rights. The burden of we've also witnessed the burden of the extremely high cost of living during the state capture years, which is now passed on to the citizens. We've seen the interest on the state debt around 1.3 billion rand a day, which citizens have to carry, even though they're not part of, or they're not responsible for that. And then during the Zondo Commission, we've also seen the plight of the whistleblowers, where whistleblowers who have been patriotic to the country have paid the highest cost, in some cases lives, and in many cases livelihoods. Thank you. Next one. And as we proceed, have had exposure to the state capture period, we cannot ignore that our basic human rights of citizens is being hampered by the elephant in the room. And in my view, the elephant in the room is the systemic corruption and state capture. It's estimated that the cost of state capture is around 1.5 trillion rand to the fiscus. And I would question whether this is not a crime against humanity, or perhaps a genocide of a new order. You might recall during the height of the pandemic, when various leaders in private sector and public sector escalated prices of medical goods and devices, At the time, the World Health Organization referred to it as murder. And Archbishop Thabo Makgoba referred to this as treasonous. The hollowing out of state institutions has certainly impacted the state's ability to fight crime and corruption, and hence impact on state's capacity and capability to deliver the basic services. And if this is unchecked, we could have a collapse of governance across the board nationally and a failed state. We've seen this in other parts of the world, such as Zimbabwe, Syria, and Lebanon. So justice and human rights for whistleblowers and citizens is important in this period, where they have helped to expose the whole process of state capture. But while that's important, equally important is accountability and sanction for enablers of state capture and perpetrators of crime and corruption generally. You might recall that at the height of the pandemic, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, supported by President Ramaphosa, spoke about a generational opportunity to fix generational damages. These damages did not just happen during the COVID crisis, they were there prior. The COVID crisis just helped bring it to the fore, and he called for a new social contract. Thank you. Next one, please. So this takes us to the gauntlet that has been laid down by President Ramaphosa, as well as the UN Secretary General, and also more recently at the State of Nation address in February this year, when President Ramaphosa spoke about the biggest threat facing our country is the state capture and grand corruption, and appealing to citizens of honesty, integrity, and competence coming forward to help. So this led to the birth of the new entity called Citizens for Integrity. Myself as founding member, as well as former head of SIU and NPA, Willie Hofmeyer, came together, and we are building the team at the moment. And our vision is very clearly to realize the goals of the 1994 Mandela dream of freedom, dignity, and equality for all through the implementation of our constitutional values and principles. And that talks very closely to what the former Deputy Minister Mafu spoke about values and principles. And you might remember the very powerful comment by former President Mandela in 1994, when he said, never, never, and never again. And I would like to use the same expression, that never, never, never again should we have state capture and corruption on the magnitude we have seen during this last 10 years. So the founding statement of Citizens for Integrity, what are we all about? So Citizens for Integrity, we are an independent, non-profit organization led by a team of experts with the objective of fixing and rebuilding good governance in South Africa through the creation of effective and efficient governance and anti-corruption machinery of state and strategies to comply with the United Nations SDG number 16, as well on good governance, as well as the National Development Plan and the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which President Ramaphosa has now signed into effect. So how do we intend promoting a rights-based culture, as Deputy Minister John Jeffery spoke about? So essentially, it takes me to the mission statement of CFI, or Citizens for Integrity, and it's all about fixing and rebuilding governance. So the first one is we would like to institutionalize good governance to specific governance and constitutional reforms and interventions to enable meeting the NDP and SDG goals. And hence, in this way, realize the human rights aspirations of the citizens that are entrenched in the Constitution. The second one is to advocate and facilitate a return to the values, tenets, and principles of the Constitution, Pathopela and Ubuntu, thereby achieving the social compact as envisaged in the Constitution and the NDP. The former Concord Justice Albie Sachs spoke about the DNA in Tambo linked to the DNA in the Constitution, and while I agree with him, I'd also like to extend that to Mandela, Sisulu, and many of the other fellow comrades who were in prison then. And essentially, these were such giants of the struggle, representing ethics, integrity, and it's important to go back to the values and principles enshrined in the Constitution that embody the DNA of those leaders. The third one is to address the damage done by the state capture project through necessary legislative and constitutional amendments as are needed to prevent a repetition of the capture of the state. In this regard, we talk of an integrity commission, and that embodies the STIRS principles, namely, in terms of the principles, the STIRS really means a specialized group of individuals who are trained, who are independent, and who have the necessary resources, but more importantly, have security of tenure. And I think we've missed the S in the last 10 years following the disbanding of the Scorpions in 2007. And the chief architect who has been consulting to our group is Advocate Paul Hoffman, and who spent the last 10 years researching and writing a book in this area and working closely with the CFI team. The next one is on integrity testing, and colleagues might know the other lead founder, namely Willy Hofmeyr, who successfully implemented this at the SIU when he led the SIU. And the SIU was successful in avoiding being captured during the state capture period. And the other important aspects of legislative improvement is whistleblower protection. And in this regard, Willy and myself have worked with various civil society groups under the banner of Active Citizen Movement in making a submission to the Zondo Commission to look at this. And we're also working closely with the Deputy Minister Jeffrey's team on advancing the adjustments to the legislation and constitution. And that also includes recovery of the stolen loot. We spoke about the 1.5 trillion, and the stolen loot is urgently needed to fund development programs, human rights programs, so that the human rights ethos of the Constitution is realized and that we end up having a better life for all as envisioned in the Constitution. And lastly, is the other important mission is also to raise civil society awareness through constitutional education programs and initiative on rights, responsibilities, values, ethics, and integrity. And in this regard, I also sit on the forum with the Human Rights Commission, the Department of Justice, Department of Culture, Education. That's the CREWG working group. And I essentially support what Deputy Minister Mafu has been talking on, and also support the various initiatives on eradicating intolerance. And I think most recent has been the initiative by government on the Cricket South Africa Transformation Initiative, which is really a cocktail of poor governance and racism. And finally, as part of the CREWG, the group also, we've been talking in the last year of rolling out a national program on a values orientation so that citizens understand the values, the rights, responsibilities, and we can help improve the climate towards one of nation building, social cohesion, and peace and harmony as envisioned by the drafters of our constitution. And along with that, the leaders behind that, Tambo, Mandela, amongst many others. Thank you, colleagues. I'll leave it there. Just on the last slide, I'd like to leave you with the closing words by Gandhi. The world is big enough to satisfy everyone's needs, but will always be too small for everyone's greed, and how true that is. And in CFI coming together, we maintain that bad things will happen when good people remain silent and do nothing, and that justifies why the group came together. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you, Mr. Pillay. I think indicating the important role that civil society organizations have to play in obviously upholding not just the constitutional rights, but also, all the needs that society has ultimately in making sure that we not just uphold human rights, but things like corruption are looked at, and what are some of the factors that we have to deal with. And I think an important message indeed on Africa Day. Up next, I think an equally important conversation that we're going to have, and that is the journey and significant milestones achieved by women in South Africa, empowering them to navigate the socioeconomic challenges. And that will be delivered by Ms. Sharon Ekambram from Lawyers for Human Rights. Now, just give me an opportunity to tell you a little more about her. Now, Sharon is a human rights activist and has been involved in the struggle for social justice through her work. In the 1980s, she worked with young people fleeing from communities due to apartheid state repression. She was one of the founding members of the Treatment Action Campaign and later worked for the AIDS Consortium in the struggle for affordable treatment for people living with HIV and AIDS, and later against AIDS denialism of the South African government. She then took up a position as project head to establish the Chris Hani Institute, located at Kosato House. She worked for the international medical humanitarian organization Doctors Without Borders for 10 years and was the founding director. She is currently the head of Refugees and Migrant Rights program at Lawyers for Human Rights. Now, without any further ado, Sharon, if you can take the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gershwell, and greetings to my fellow panelists. I think, as you pointed out, while I will be looking at the significant role that women have played, my presentation is going to look at, firstly, the significance and power of our Constitution. And I think as we celebrate Africa Month, to put some reflections on what role South Africa can play as we embrace ourselves as Africans living on the African continent. I think an important and an appropriate starting point is to reflect on the significance of the march that African women led, protesting against the Dompas and the apartheid laws, which took place, as we all know, on the 9th of August in 1956. And I think that in that legacy, we have really formidable women leaders like Charlotte Maxeke, who has been referred to, like Winnie Mandela, Dora Tamane, Albertina Sisulu, and Mum Emma Mashinini. And just as an aside, I'd really implore the panelists and the participants, to read up on Mama Emma Mashinini has written, when she was alive, she wrote an incredible book about her struggles as a Black African woman living in our country. She spoke about her struggles in the trade union movement, COSATU, and as a woman, as a mother, and as a wife. And on top of all of this, the fighting a incredibly militarized, brutal, racist regime in our country. And so I'd like to pay tribute to these formidable leaders and the many, many women that have contributed and paid with their lives for us to celebrate and appreciate our democracy and freedom that we enjoy, and our Constitution, which is one of the most powerful in the world. I think the one, as an introduction to the rest of my presentation today, I do think that we need to reflect more on how the struggle to overthrow the racist apartheid regime and the horrific racism in our country, crime against humanity, we in that process put on the back burner our fight against the patriarchal capitalist system that continues to leave women, and in particular Black African women, as the face of poverty in our country and bearing the brunt, as I will explain, of the poverty, inequality, and even when it comes to migration, the burden that falls on the shoulders of Black African women. Now, just very briefly, Lawyers for Human Rights has been functioning since the days of apartheid, over 40 years of existence. The organization, as many of you know, played a formidable role in ending the death penalty, and also was involved in countering and fighting against forced removals under the apartheid state. And I think that we need to celebrate organizations like LHR, like Section 27, like LRC, who it really does reflect the strength of our democracy, the vibrancy of our democracy, and the fact that there are a plethora of organizations that in working with civil society hold or struggle to hold our state to account. And in all of this, we laud the independence of our judiciary and some of the hallmark judgments that have made a significant contribution in what I believe is the cornerstone of our constitution in this issue of respect for human dignity, which has to be the key in looking at when we talk about our transformation agenda from a wretched past, and dignity and respect for human rights for all who live in South Africa. So Lawyers for Human Rights, its approach to promoting social justice and fighting for human rights uses strategic litigation, community education, as many speakers have spoken about the importance of mobilization in our society, and in building coalitions and working in collaboration and building solidarity. And I think that point I want to underscore the need for us to build solidarity if we are going to enjoy the brilliant constitution and our ability to make it something real rather than just a lived experience for the majority of people in our country and on the continent, rather than just something on paper that we hold out and are proud of. And I think our history as Lawyers for Human Rights, we've made contributions in the field of the refugee and migrant rights in terms of gender equality, criminal justice reform, environmental rights, and access to land and housing in the post-democratic dispensation, not just from our roots in our fight against apartheid. Now, I think it is, and I made this point in my opening comments, that we are here celebrating 25 years since the signing of the South African Constitution. And that's I think, if you reflect on that, we have to honestly look at where we are as a country. And the reality for the vast majority of the country's people is that they see little tangible benefit from this incredibly enlightened legislative environment. And South Africa, as we know, and I think we should be ashamed of this, and should all of us, not just pointing fingers at the government, but as people living in this country, what are we doing to address the fact that South Africa has the largest gap between the tiny minority rich people and the poor in the world? And while we celebrate the milestones of what women have achieved, we hang our head in shame when we know that there's violent crime committed against women and children, and where more than 1 in 2 young people are unemployed and have little hope of finding work. And there's grinding poverty, which is endemic and has been further exposed with what this current outbreak of COVID, the global pandemic. The face of poverty, for me, is especially if we're speaking of our leaders like Baba Madiba and others, it was something the pride and what the dispensation brought, the new dispensation, our democracy brought, was the respect for children and dignity for children, dignity for women. And yet in July 2020, according to a report released by Stats SA, Child Poverty in South Africa, statistics reveal that approximately 70% of Black African children show the highest percentage of poverty. They call it multidimensional poverty, compared to peers from the other population groups. Now, this is something that we should be having sleepless nights over, these so-called other population groups, because we benefited unfairly from the privileges of apartheid and its divide and rule. And I think that there's a serious onus on those who did benefit unfairly to give back and to address these heinous stats and crime of poverty in our country. And of course, the link to this is that this poverty, as exposed by its stats from Stats SA, is that it's prevalent in families where there is no parents. Parents have died, or they have one parent. And I don't think enough has been spoken about, reflected, and provide enough redress in our society for what the AIDS pandemic did. The approximately 300,000 people that died prematurely because they couldn't get access to ARVs, and the impact that that had on families of grannies looking after children and child-headed households. And today we have stats about poverty as if it's a natural phenomenon. And so I think that we as a country need to own that crisis and provide redress accordingly. Coming to Black African women, the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma said that just recently, I think it was mid-2020, that research is showing that African women have been hardest hit by COVID-19 pandemic, and in particular with reference to the harsh regulations on the lockdown. And as I pointed out earlier, Black African women continue to bear the heaviest burden of poverty in our country. Now, people have spoken about xenophobia, and I want to add another shameful point in stark juxtaposition of our incredible constitution, and that's hate crimes against the LGBTQI community. We are experiencing violence against women, murder of members of the LGBTQI plus community, and xenophobia, the kind of heinous violence against foreign nationals. And yet these realities exist in a country that prides itself as being a constitutional democracy with an equality clause that makes it one of the most progressive in the world. As I said earlier on, I just want to speak about what the Constitution means and what it means to me. And as I pointed out earlier, I think the visionary transformative elements of the Constitution have been captured brilliantly in some of the judgments handed down at the Constitutional Court that we've celebrated. And yet what I feel is lacking is the state in using this Constitution, and especially the fact that because of our Constitution, South Africa remains a beacon of hope for the world. And this vision and this beacon of hope speaks directly to the question of respect for human rights and respect for human dignity. And I don't think that we are using this as our foreign national policy. And speakers have mentioned the conflicts on the continent, the question of migration. And the point I want to agree with what the speaker from IOM said, we can't stop migration. Migration has been part of the human race for as long as we have existed. And yet we see in our country the criminalization of migration. And it can't go unmentioned that the majority of people who bear the brunt of this criminalization of migration are our Black African brothers and sisters coming from this very African continent that we're celebrating today. And this migration cannot be looked at without considering two critical points. One, that our country and our region has no mechanism and no political will to ensure that we have proper disaggregated data about movement. Who is moving? What is circular movement? Why are people moving? And more linked to that point is the fact that we have no way of documenting and understanding the question of internal movement. And this internal movement is directly linked to a transformation of this country. We all know that this country was divided according to race and class, and Black African people were sent off to the most barren parts of the country, And in part of redress, urbanization is taking place. And yet provincial governments have no means, no tool to monitor how many people are moving from the Eastern Cape to Gauteng, and in that way using our facilities, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's access to social services. And we can't stop this. We have to embrace it, we have to budget for it, and we have to ensure that these services continue to be provided with dignity, respect for dignity and human rights, because this was denied to Black African people in our country under the apartheid regime. And as the Deputy Minister of Constitutional Development mentioned, foreign nationals have a right to basic human rights in our country, and that includes healthcare and it includes education. And yet what we are witnessing in Gauteng is foreign nationals being charged exorbitant fees at the very Charlotte Maxeke Hospital, which for me is a shame to have that name if we consider the institutionalized xenophobia and in particular in Gauteng of excluding foreign nationals, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants from access to giving birth. Women who are being asked to pay 20,000 Rand before they can give birth in our hospitals. And I'm sure Baba Madiba has to be turning in his grave. Just some shocking stats, and I'll move on to the African continent and what role we can play. I think that our government has to be playing a much more progressive, militant role in dealing with the fact that Africa is a difficult place for the LGBTQI community. I want to just give something that I think will be interesting for all of you here. I was shocked to read, and I shouldn't have been shocked, that South Africa is the only country on the African continent that affirmatively permits and recognizes same-sex marriage, that we have in our constitution a clause, and we have an incredibly progressive policy and legislation on that issue. And 72 countries worldwide criminalize homosexuality, and 32 of them are on our very own African continent. My last few points are just around inequalities globally that this COVID has wreaked on us, and why we cannot have solutions that are nationalistic and looking at in context of borders, because COVID has exposed that we live in a global world, and travel is one of the key vectors that initially took COVID to other countries. And that's not to blame countries, but the fact that how do we, as I said earlier on, manage and regularize movements in the context of what is going to be ongoing global pandemics like COVID. I think that for me, again, going back to women, statistics say that 740 million women globally work in the informal economy. And this informal economy is around healthcare, social and domestic work, care industry that women carry and are paid lower wages than men in that sector of society. And yet, so they were more at risk of getting COVID. They were more, carrying the burden of care under COVID. And I think that these have to be acknowledged and counted and dealt with. My last point is what is needed. And I think that we as South Africans, we have to own this constitution. And we have, in particular, those who benefited unfairly under apartheid, we have to feel a prick in our conscience, and we have to give back to fight for equality. This inequality and poverty in our country, as I said earlier on, is not a natural phenomenon. It has been created by the evil leadership of men. And I use that word very, very consciously. The one last element I want to bring in is our struggle against the multinational corporates and states that collude as it plunders through exploitation and discrimination. And in this drive for increasing profits. And I want to close with what I feel was a very inspired speech that our president made at the Global Health Summit. And he spoke about the fact that we have to chart a course for collective action in response to both the current and future global health pandemics, He spoke about doing away with vaccine nationalism. He even mentioned reviewing international intellectual property in the context of global health pandemics. But what he said, which I think we have to, celebrate and work on to ensure solidarity globally, is that he said we are in a global war and must use all our weapons without hiding behind profit at the expense of lives. So on that note, I say thank you very much and forward to the struggle for equality and justice for all.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of the formal presentations, of course, by our various panelists. What I will do is I'll use this as an opportunity to go through some of the comments and the questions that have come through. And I really do appreciate those of you that have participated. So I think that there's a couple of things that I just wanted to point out. The one that stands out for me is someone obviously asking, good morning. All, thank you for organizing this informative event. Just checking whether the slides or recording will be shared. And the response to that is indeed, we will share the recording on our social media platforms, as well as on www.justice.gov.za. So that's where you can access the recording of this particular event, this webinar. Just log on to the website. I think that's also a good guide for you to find out where you can find out more about, or where you can follow up on the subsequent events. Someone else came through asking, thank you, honorable speakers, where can I find out more about the upcoming season's projects from the DSAC? And the response to that is, this is the first of many webinars to be conducted in celebration of 25th anniversary of the Constitution. Upcoming sessions will be posted on www.justice.gov.za and our social media platforms. The next webinar will be in June 2021, addressing issues affecting the youth. So that's the next webinar to look forward to coming through from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. People also reaching out to you, Mr. Coogan Pillay, saying, Mr. Pillay, please share your inspiring presentation. We have a lot in common. Once I've acquainted myself with it, I'll communicate. And then, of course, the email is shared, which I think is great. Already like-minded people wanting to get together and work together. I see that Ms. Lily Sanya is giving her apologies that she will have to leave soon because she has a meeting, which is completely understandable. Thank you so much and all the best to you. And thank you for participating in this. And then also a request coming through for you, Sharon, saying, Mr. Kambaram, please share your presentation. You say things we repeatedly say on Nexa, Musa, and UBB. We need to find a way to work together, and then the email is also given there. It seems that there's a lot of like-mindedness and a lot of people wanting to make connections. I think what I can do is, for the next couple of minutes, if there's anyone else that wants to chime in with any final points that they would like to raise from our panelists and our speakers, of course, going from Mr. Coogan Pillay to Ms. Sharon, to Ms. Lily, to Justice Albie Sachs, and to the Deputy Minister, John Jeffery, our speakers that are remaining. If there's anyone that would like to say something, we can, I think, afford 5 minutes to have that opportunity for any final thoughts. While you're thinking about those, of course, I just want to give a brief summary of what we've discussed, obviously, thus far. I think the important thing is Africa Day, it covers so many issues, and I think all of the presentations that came through thus far highlighted some of the key issues that we have to think about, all the way through from the need for the development of the Constitution that we have today, that's turning 25 this year, the role that other African states played, not only in contributing towards that Constitution or making that Constitution real or needed, but also the role that they had played in making sure that the drafters of our Constitution were kept safe during that particular period, all the way through to the role that gender plays, and the need that equality is still, real and true equality is still needed. especially when we start thinking around the issues of gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, as well as many other factors that we need to take into account, especially socioeconomic class as well. I think also the role of migration and where we are, unfortunately, as a nation. I think one of the key things that we really do need to think about is that obviously we need to start thinking about the role that migration plays and the role that we play as South Africans in combating things such as xenophobia, and what are some of the factors that give rise to xenophobia, that gives rise to some of the concerns that we have in that space. But I think, and this came through from Coogan Pilay's presentation, I think that another factor that we need to really think about and take into deep account for is the issue of corruption and the impact that that unfortunately also has to play in all of these factors. So I think Africa Day is not just a day where, of course, it is centered around looking at the achievements that the then OAU, or the Organization for African Unity, played 58 years ago. But I think years later, 58 years, nearly 6 decades later, we really need to start thinking about all the factors beyond just those achievements, but what is needed to take Africa forward, including our very own South Africa. And I think for me, in a nutshell, that is what it ultimately boils down to. If there's none of the other speakers from our list of panelists that wish to chime in at this stage, I will then turn to the Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mr. John Jeffery. Just ask him to close for us. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gashwal. I just see there are, okay. No, well, look, let me sort of close by thanking everybody for participating in this webinar, in the discussion. I think it's been very useful. Obviously, the key is not so much talking about the issues, but what do we do about them? That is important. And as has been said, the papers will be circulated, and I think it's important to highlight the key issues requiring action, and then to ensure that we move forward. We have from the Department of Justice side, the National Action Plan, which unfortunately is not particularly operational. So, I mean, inputs into how that process can get going and make a real difference is something that's quite important. But otherwise, let me thank everybody, the panelists, for their participation, and then also the members of the public who joined on other platforms, and lastly to Mr. Gershwell Brooks from the South African Human Rights Commission for his very able chairing and directing of the program. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. I think that then brings our program to an end. Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be the program director for not just esteemed guests, but I think a very important session indeed. We wish you all the best to everyone watching this and participating in this, and thank you so much for participating. All the best. Thank you.